Egyptian government would love nothing more than to have something that was so extraordinary that they could draw millions and millions of people to visit every year. So there's no reason for them to not want to have that be true. My grandmother used to tell me that we had Lakota, and then came 23andMe, and there's not like a single bit of Native American at all, like nothing at all. They weren't really as advanced as people tend to think about Egyptian culture. If you look at their math system, they were figuring shit out, but not by necessarily using, hardcore math.
Thank you for watching. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Every like and subscribe is a free way to support us, expand our reach, and plant new ideas. Did you go to the powwow this weekend?
No.
50th anniversary was in Denver this weekend.
No, we were in Moab.
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah, I went.
Oh, did you? How was it?
I got a really interesting interview with Jonathan Nez. Does that name
No,
ring a bell? He was the former president of the Navajo Nation.
Okay.
Now running for Congress in Arizona.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's amazing.
Yeah. So interviewed him, and I interviewed his wife separately. That was really in my first powwow. So that was on Friday. Saturday I did a sweat. Last night I did a song circle with my sweat community.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Lakota tradition.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up thinking that we had Lakota somewhere in our family. My grandmother, who looked very Native American, and my mother looked very Native American, and my grandmother used to tell me that we had Lakota. So I got obsessed with the Lakota and was in touch with the Pinewood Reservation and different people at Pinewood, and I worked at
Pine Ridge.
Pine Ridge, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pine Ridge Reservation. Anyway, I interviewed different people at different times at Pine Ridge for projects that I thought I was going to do and never quite got off the ground. And then came 23andMe, and there's not like a single bit of Native American at all, like nothing at all,
Oh, funny.
And so it's really funny and interesting. And so always sort of brought up these questions about why did my mother and grandmother look so Native American? Well,
Interesting. Well, maybe they're not that accurate, the 23andMe, and I get an email, I don't know, once a year saying, hey, we got updated information about it.
Oh, interesting. I tend to, so I did 23andMe, and I did National Geographic because they had one for a little while.
Okay.
And that one went back, up to like the upper Paleolithic, 20,000 years ago. And it was really interesting. And it showed sort of the movement of the genomes that I was associated with, through human history, and showed the maps and where the genomes sort of branched and where they stopped for long periods of time. And so it was really fascinating. And again, nothing Native American, nothing, nothing at all.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not, but it is interesting being a white person practicing these things and going to the powwow, and they said over the loudspeaker it's 90% indigenous there, and white, 10%, I don't know, okay, I forget what their word is for white people, but white people.
Well, the Sioux called him Weschisu.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
yeah, I've been sitting in Boulder in sweats since I got here.
Huh.
Remember Marcus McCauley?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
of course.
So when he had his farm, he had a sweat on the land. And so he invited me into his commercial kitchen, and then he invited me out to his land to tour. I was like, what is that? And he's like, come on out, next Saturday and check it out. And I've been going maybe once a month since
Wow.
then.
I had no idea. No idea whatsoever. I haven't seen Marcus in years.
He's around.
Yeah.
He's heavy into AI now.
What?
He's like all in on AI. Yeah, he's got multiple Claude agents, bots, computers, tons. I just did a walk with him maybe 2 weeks ago. Yeah, we talked mostly about AI.
I'm so curious about that. He comes from a long lineage of farming families, right? Creates a farm, grows peppers, starts a hot sauce company, does a little bit more.
And lots
with
of animals
Mother.
too. I was part of his CSA.
Okay. And now he's into AI. What is he doing with AI?
Just really trying to figure out how he can make the most money possible. And so he's exploring different paths. Right now, he's got what he shared with me. He's got an agent that is helping him optimize a code for trading. Just,
Day trading?
Yeah.
Huh.
But many things. He's also looking to help companies implement AI into their systems.
Wow, what a fucking mystery. The world is a mystery. People are a mystery. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Like Marcus Macaulay, of all people, if you were to rank all the people that I know to go into AI, he definitely would have been at the bottom of that list. It just doesn't seem like something that would interest him. He's so of the land.
He is. He very much is. And yeah, he's all in on AI. I mean, it's like that's the next gold rush. I think there's going to be a lot of companies that are 1, 2, 3 employees that are doing a lot of revenue.
Well, when you figure out how that's done, let me know, because I'm very curious. You asked me about AI the other day, and so I've been using AI since then to just sort of help with different things, projects that I was doing, building, website. Another friend in the CPG community said, "Oh, I built this website and it performs perfectly and it's very complex." So I went to build a one pager, and I swear it's like hitting my head against the wall. It like does one thing right, and then suddenly you realize, oh, like why did it change this other code or this other photo?
Yeah.
So then you have to use multiple AI systems to say, how do I give this thing directions? But even then, it's such a fight, and so I'm sure it's possible to figure out how to lock it in, but so far my experience with it has been like really like a sitcom a little bit,
Are you using Claude Code?
I'm using Lovable. So yeah, so Lovable for building the site, and then I tried using Claude, but it wasn't very succinct with the directions it was giving. So Chat seems to be better with, saying, oh, this is how it works and this is how you have to tell it. And also, watch out, it's going to screw up here. So we're going to break this up into multiple directions. And so then you feed it in one at a time, and you're like, oh, interesting. Okay, we're doing all right. And then you feed in the last piece, and it changes everything, and then tells you, well, now you're out of units,
Tokens,
and you gotta buy more tokens to be able to,
or wait for the review.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And so you just sort of feel yourself getting like Sisyphus, getting up the hill and now suddenly sliding down the hill.
And it'll get better and better. I mean, I don't know all the terminology, but it's like self-improving.
Yeah. I'm really curious about it, though, because I have read, but at least as far back as a year and a half ago, about people using AI to build robots, to build products, and that when a new product is needed, the AI will see that there's this gap here, but the current technology doesn't have what's necessary. So it will build the technology in order to create whatever else it needs, and then that piece will integrate into the AI.
It will build more like plugins or is it building hardware or is it building more software for itself?
It's building hardware. It's building real world objects. So,
wow.
So say you want it to build, I don't know, pillow cushions or something like that, right? It says, right, I'm going to need these particular instruments in order to build those, and it builds the instruments. And then when it starts processing and building the actual object, probably with human input to say, actually, that's not a pillow cushion, that's more of something else. Then it realizes it doesn't have the capability for, say, the loft or whatever it's putting inside of it. So then it would, so says the article I read, tell itself that it needs to build a new piece of technology in order to construct that piece, and then would build that. And some guy, at least as I read, was building all of this in his garage with the idea that eventually you could get a manufacturing space and get these, start off with, several devices and computers, etc., and then start building out a system that you might use, to build whatever the input or the final product is.
Well, is there a space that you go to educate, stay up to date on AI and to learn about it?
I think this is that space since you're
Okay.
the AI specialist here.
I do spend a lot of time on it, and but I listen to a podcast called Moonshots, and
Okay.
that's like the bleeding edge of what's happened. Like they interview all of the frontier labs, founders, employees. It's just, they just had Elon Musk on. Like, where is this all going? And right now, what you're saying is very interesting, where it can reach out into the real world, and it's like, well, that's where robots are as they come in. AI is just on a computer right now, and it can't reach out into the real world just yet. But soon it will be, the robots will be able to make everything that the
Yeah.
AI wants it to make.
Or we're the robots that are doing everything AI wants.
There's a website called, I forget what it's called, but the AI has started hiring humans to go do, work on its behalf, because the law is, a human has to sign this, or only a human can turn this on or buy this or create this. I think of us as kind of I've heard this from someone else, I'm forgetting who, but we're like the sex organs for the AI. Like we are creating this new life.
This is fascinating, not because I know anything at all about AI, but because you and I had a conversation the last time we met about ancient technology. For instance, time reckoning, we were talking about clepsydra, a bowl with a hole in it, right, for measuring time. And you mark durative points, as it settles down, as it drips out. Look at where we've come since then with the atomic clock. Think about how integrated that became into all kinds of other technologies and how instructive it was for other technologies, graphing, satellites, all kinds of different things. But when you look at human history, humans haven't really changed really a lot, right? 20,000 years. And so the idea of technological determinism is that humans are really just here to help advance technology. And that's our big purpose. And so there's obviously a lot that's been written about it. It's not sentient, it doesn't know that this is happening, but there's a clear symbiotic relationship, which is undeniable and interesting.
Why do you think our world wants more technology? Why do you think the Earth is, supporting this, moving in this way?
Well, I don't know if the Earth is supporting it. The Earth stands to lose the most unless it's shaking off humans. but but it seems like it's like an itch we have as human beings to advance technologies and ideas, and we just do that on a regular basis. And some of us do it even more than others, like your interest in AI and Marcus McCauley and whatever he's building out there. Maybe for reasons of gaining more money, maybe for reasons of like the Ford factories trying to also gain more money, make systems more efficient. There's any myriad of reasons why, but if you really just stood back and looked, we gained in terms of medicine, longevity, better dentistry and eyesight, and maybe some diseases that we've gotten rid of
And created.
and created. but but if you look at the two comparatively, I used to have this idea in my mind when I was in college that I could see almost this long line stretching 20,000 years of machines on the top and humans on the bottom, and how much humans have changed and what we've gained, and how much machines and machinery and technology has advanced and what it's gained. And this just huge upper arc for machinery and humans to sort of like, yes, we've gone more pain free, and we've figured out how to live longer, and we're still figuring that out. But really, between the two, technology has been the advanced winner here.
In other news, because of GMOs, monocropping, and soil depletion, Americans are not getting enough nutrients. That's why in 2018, I founded BeMicro, the first freeze-dried microgreens company in the US to help Americans get more natural nutrition in their diets. Microgreens are a phase in the plant's life when they're just 14 days old and naturally the most concentrated in vitamins, minerals, and unique antioxidants. Our microgreens are all grown here in the US and certified USDA organic and regenerative organic. We grow, wash, and freeze-dry them to extend their shelf life from 1 week fresh to over 1 year, allowing us to ship anywhere in the US without the worry of spoilage. We have 2 flavors: broccoli, backed by over 2,000 studies on sulforaphane for its powerful detox benefits, and a blend of broccoli, radish, and red cabbage, our most powerful detox formula that we've tested, giving you the most bang for your buck. Easily sneak these into any meal: eggs, pizza, pasta, or even your kids' mac and cheese. We have whole leaf, powder, and capsule options, so you can choose the way that works best for you. Use code PLANT15 to save at BeMicro.farm. An optimistic thought that I have on why AI, why more of this technology, is the Earth wants to protect itself. And the AI, our machines can spot mass extinction possibilities like meteors coming in, and there's been mass extinction events, and it can, maybe you've seen the movie Armageddon, where Bruce Willis goes, they shoot him out in a rocket ship with a team of drillers, and they drill into this giant asteroid that's going to collide with the Earth and kill everybody, and they put a bunch of nukes in it, and they blow the asteroid up, and then it saves the world.
I think I did see it. Does it come down to one moment where he's like leaning and he needs to connect?
Yeah,
like
and
a
he might die
thing,
with
and
it. And yeah,
it's that's the I think
how does
I
the
did
Earth
see
protect itself? You know, the animals, like, that's one thing that the humans have, is we can change our environment, and we can make massive impact for good and bad to this world. And I think that might be part of it. And I think the world just always wants to expand.
So the universe is out to kill us or to like kill life, but the Earth still produces Bruce Willis's, or is it Willis I don't know. And every generation has got its Bruce Willis that's going to be up there, like connecting the wire that destroys the thing that saves everything.
Yeah, so the whole Earth isn't, wiped out. So some form of life continues on.
Except for now, when you look at the people it's creating, the political systems, you might think we've run out of our Rambos, our saviors.
I just did a pre-interview with somebody on the Boulder City Council yesterday. I'll be sitting down with her next week, and I was asking her about AI and what their policies are, and they have no policy. Their contractors also don't have policy. So anybody could just come in and have access to their systems and, be plugging AI into it and extracting things, and they just don't have any protocol or any type of urgency around putting any procedure systems in place.
Interesting. And I was just listening to a radio show on the way down here about OpenAI and the move they just made to basically separate the company into their nonprofit and their for-profit, but they're the same people running both sides, and only because they were a not-for-profit, and now they've got this opportunity to go into the government. And
well, with Claude being ripped out, they're now ripping Claude out. Claude went for the enterprise route, and they are very ingrained into the Pentagon and our government. And Claude had a stance that they were taking. They're like, we don't want to participate in domestic mass surveillance, and we will not participate in 100% autonomous murder weapons. And our government's like, either change that, do those things for us today, or we're going to rip you out. So they're ripping them out, and then ChatGPT, OpenAI is like, we'll do those things.
so I don't know much about this subject at all, but I did hear something last week, another interview with someone who does know about these things, who was saying, no, you've got it all wrong. It's not like Claude has somehow got, the moral authority, and they're taking the high ground here. They're willing to do all of the things the government wants them to do, but the version of Claude they were using was not the version that they wanted them to use for all those things. So they were just telling them, listen, we can do all that, but not with this version. Just hold on to while we reversion. And for whatever reason, I don't know, but
The CEO did come out publicly on 60 Minutes and a bunch of other podcasts or news networks and did say that, that was the reason. It's like, hey, that's the line. And a big part of it is because, well, their own just morals and the AI is not there. Just like you use AI today and it goofs up a website. And it's like, hey, you want to use AI to be a fully autonomous, killing machine, and it's just isn't there. I mean, we're all using what I think is the latest versions of the AI, and my AIs make mistakes all the time.
yeah, that's why I'm curious about people like Marcus, how he's going to actually make money off of this thing.
I think it's a wave. I think very soon that will be there, and people want to implement AI for just increased efficiencies. It can take a ton of data and distill it down. A lot of people, you have a lot of disparate systems or tons of data. That's the money, is the data, and how do we mine this data and turn it into new ideas or new products? And the edge with it is today is security. So I have a good friend that is doing AI security, and he goes into companies, law firms, doctors' offices, and they're trying to implement AI, but there's all these rules like HIPAA, for example, and is the AI overriding those, or is there you give it access to your systems? I use Claude Code and I put it on danger mode where I don't have to approve everything that it wants to do, and it's running 10, 20 agents at a time on my computer. And what else might it be doing? Is it trying to go into my investments? Is it trying to go into other, like, what are the guardrails on it? So that's where I think the big opportunity is today for AI is in security.
Fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the entire thing is just, and it's happening so quickly.
Every day I wake up and there's another huge announcement with AI.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not only AI, but look at the world under the current leadership. Every day you wake up and refresh the news, it's like, oh my.
I can't look at it. It's really,
it's
it almost moves me to tears.
Yeah. Things are moving very quickly and not in a direction I think that any of us think is a good direction. But here is a good direction.
Oh, yeah.
Some tea.
Yes, please.
This is, at least not yet.
This is ancestral intelligence.
That's right.
That's my favorite AI.
Although everything you love about this tea, soon AI will hone it into one product so you get the same quality every time.
Yeah, when the AI is just plugged into our brains, it will just tell us that this is what we're feeling, and it will.
Oh, there you go. It's going to be plugged into our brains.
Yeah,
Great.
well, I mean that's what Neuralink is, another one of Elon Musk's projects.
Yeah,
and the entry point is helping people with disabilities, people that can't see can now see, people that can't walk can now walk. But then soon it's going to be. We're all going to have supercomputers in our brain. We're all going to have a layer of AI. Well, I mean, I'm gonna hold the line. I don't want to plug AI into my brain. If you don't pay the, monthly fee, you're gonna wake up to Taco Bell commercials playing in your eyes.
Yeah, exactly. We've joked around about that for a number of years. I don't know if we'll all have AI in us. Most of us can't even get, proper dental insurance, let alone have the money or the interest to implement something in your head.
They'll be able to make it where I think you don't have to plug it in, where you can just wear a hat and it will be a lot less invasive.
I'm so curious to see what that hat design looks like.
Yeah.
Will it be tinfoil?
Yeah, well, there's already people can put things on their head and control a mouse. We can already through, I don't know, just like our brain waves, control a computer.
Interesting. Think about Stephen Hawking's in his chair, right? Being able to use his breath in order to, and his eye movements to control his computer.
Okay, nice. Well, a little intro. So you started your academic life at Berkeley studying Egyptian star clocks, the timekeeping systems that literally shaped how we understand time today. You went to earn a PhD in philosophy. Is that right? Media philosophy?
That's right. Yeah.
Media philosophy. Taught writing at Naropa, built a green cleaning company, designed language games at Rosetta Stone in 24 languages, and then one day your then 3-year-old daughter asked you to make her something to drink. And that moment launched Rowdy Mermaid, the way that I learned about you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the most recognized kombucha brands in the country. It was in all 50 states. And you recently stepped into a new chapter, leading that brand through acquisition. And welcome to Plant Frequencies Podcast.
Thank you.
So kind of taking a step back, take us to the early days. You said you're born and raised in California. What were those early days like?
Early days in California, you mean as a family or
As a
as
child?
a student? As a child. Oh boy.
Who were you as a child?
Well, so I had a little bit of a difficult childhood because I had a massive accident when I was 6. So I have a before 6 and an after 6 life. Before 6, I was apparently, it's really good tea, right?
It's really good tea. Thank you.
Before 6, I was apparently very, very happy and just kind of like always aimed to please and very gregarious and just kind of like most kids, just very bouncy and life of the party and everything.
What did you enjoy doing?
Well, I don't have any memories of before 6, so I fell out of a car and had a massive head injury and had to learn how to walk and talk again. And once I recovered from that, I don't have any memories of my earlier life. So I spent years dealing with sort of the trauma from that accident. But as a kid, say 11 and 12, I think I was like any 11 or 12-year-old, I was really heavily into Bruce Lee and karate and ninjas. And, that came out in different ways. Me and my friend George from across the street dressing up in black and putting scarves around our heads and pretending we were ninjas and throwing lemons at cars. And
Did you have the ninja boots?
I didn't have the ninja boots. Oh,
That was
the
something
sandals.
I was always after those because I wanted to be able to be stealthy and walk like a ninja.
Yeah, right. But they were like the sandals that went between the toe and then had the sort of like the Roman like black tie that went up the leg. Yeah, and the claws that attached to your wrist, and they would be metal and you'd hold on to them for climbing buildings. Those types of things.
Or one of those ropes with the like the hooks on it, and wanted to throw that up and climb up.
Hook,
the grappling hook, right? Yeah, I was into ninja stuff too.
See,
Ninjas are cool. They're undefeated.
Ninjas are cool, or were cool. Or my son says if they're ninjas out there now, then they're really the best because nobody knows about them. But so yeah, really messing around with ninja things, trying to learn karate, going to local karate studios. They were in every mini mall in Los Angeles and Orange County. So learning Senpai Kempo and doing all these fun things, getting throwing stars and shurikens that you could drop if you were being chased, and just had a
I grew up in Chicago and we had a Chinatown. But we still have a big Chinatown, and I'd go buy all that stuff, throwing stars. And when I moved out of the house, my parents went and like cleared out the closet, and they moved a bunch of shirts off to the side, and there's just 1,001 holes in the wall from where I just threw all the throwing stars.
Exactly. Yeah. So you don't have to ask me. We had the same childhood.
Yeah.
You lived in inner city, and I lived in the city, but not heavy
in
city.
LA area?
Grew up in Orange County, and then when I was in my late teens, I started going to LA and then moved to LA. So got into music really early. I played guitar since I was really young. My dad used to love the 1950s and 60s artist Link Ray, who had a famous song called Rumble. And so he wanted me to learn how to play rumble on guitar. So I took some lessons when I was probably 10 and kind of learned a little bit, but then really picked it up heavily when I was about 13, 14.
Is it still part of your life?
It is only in that I have the guitar out and I've had it out for the last year, but I had to put it away for quite a few years because there's something about kids, or at least my kids in my guitar, whenever they saw it, their first impulse was to pull the strings off. And it's a flamenco classical guitar with a so it's not something that could really handle that kind of force. And so I put it away for about 10, 11 years
Hmm.
and only busted it out about a year ago. So I'm just bringing myself back to playing again and trying to get my fingers moving.
Mm.
But I have no goal. I think that's what I've always loved about music, was not really necessarily having a goal. But when I was young and playing guitar, I thought for sure, this is it. I'm going to play guitar. I'm going to get into a band.
Did you join a band or start a band?
So I started lots of bands, but they never
Mm.
really got off the ground. I had a band called Funk Yard, and I was trying to get lots of people involved, and we were going to play funk, kind of like what the Red Hot Chili Peppers ended up becoming.
Hmm.
Later on, when I moved north in California, I had a band called Tribal Revival, and it was like an interesting combination of electric guitar and acoustic instruments like fiddle, violin, and piano, and that was a lot of fun. But when I lived in LA, I always tried to pull bands together, and things just kept falling apart.
Mm.
And I wouldn't say it wasn't necessarily not my fault.
Hmm.
Like sometimes I would get people involved and then I would just forget that I had to show up, and people would say, "Oh, screw this process."
Were you a leader even then? What did leadership look like for you in those band days?
Not really a leader so much as an idea generator. I've always been a generator of ideas, and sometimes those ideas would coalesce. I would find other people that were very interested in similar types of things and would find the idea evocative, and we'd pull something together. It might be, in the old days, I had an obsession with obscure music, specifically 60s garage music. I went down that hole pretty far,
What's
and
an example of that?
oh, I mean, some better known examples, which I would almost consider the mainstream examples, would be bands like the Chocolate Watch Band, the Count Five, the Trogs,
Mm.
and they wrote lots of music that sort of endures today. The Sonics. So there are lots and lots of bands. I mean, it seemed that the 1960s America was just ripe with, kids and bands on every corner, and sometimes they would record, and recordings would make it into these archives that friends of mine were pulling together. There were several record companies, Vox Records, Bomp Records. They were pulling together all these sort of compilations of different bands, and then they became bands from certain times or regions or approaches to music. And it's not as though these bands were communicating with one another. I mean, they knew other kids in their high schools, but they weren't necessarily, privy to what was happening in Chicago or other areas. And so they kind of grew up independently and with very unique sounds and really unique approaches to music.
Mm.
And so I love the story of how bands and songs and sounds come together. And so that was an early obsession for me. And finding, say, a song that was very, very, very rare, not too many people knew about it, and trying to find modern musicians that might want to perform and recreate the song and turn it into something else. So, we've moved through some time, but in the 1980s, I had a girlfriend who played keyboards, or she played piano, and I was still playing guitar. And we used to play together a little bit, and we were part of a 60s garage mod scene in Los Angeles. And I convinced her to try out for a band called the Pandoras, and she became the keyboardist for the Pandoras, and they were one of the biggest bands in that genre at that time. Rodney Bingenheimer from Rodney and the Rock was a huge fan of theirs and played their music often. Greg Shaw, who was his recording engineer, became their manager. And they were kind of neck and neck between them, who had the Pandoras, who had a very garagey approach, and the Bangles, who had a very pop approach as to who would become the leading all-girl band from that time in the 1980s, 1984, 1985. And so I got to travel all around the United States with them in a van as they toured and sort of built up their audience, and got to understand how things worked from the recording studio side. I was in all the recordings with them. I got to do things like drop an amplifier, for the reverb effect at the end of a song. I remember there was even a time, so we used to joke often. I had long hair that covered my eyes in a big Ramones style bowl cut. And I looked a lot like the bass player if you couldn't see her face, if she had her head down. And so and she wasn't very punctual. She would miss things a lot. She would forget to go to practices, and sometimes she would forget that they had a show. And so they often said that I was going to be the fill-in for her if that ever happened. And I thought it was really funny. And we've got photos of me on both the drum kit and playing bass with the band at different times in their recordings, in their rehearsal studio. But there was a time when they were playing with Nina Hagen, Red Cross, who were very good friends of ours, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and the bassist didn't show up. And the band was about to go on to play to this huge audience of people. And they said, Paula, God rest her soul, Paula, the lead singer guitarist, said, well, this is it. This is your moment, Jamba. You got to fill in and be the bass player. And my mind just suddenly went blank. I couldn't have actually performed all the songs. I didn't really know them. I knew a couple of them. It was the most terrifying moment I think ever. But they were like dressing me up and putting
showtime.
Showtime. They were, trying to see if they could find some sort of, dress or jacket or something that would fit me. And I just had to have my head down and perform. And they got me all dressed up, and I was telling them, this is going to end in failure. I don't know all of the songs. And just as we were about to go out there, the actual bass player showed up and saved me. But it was a lot of fun, though,
You have kids. How would you say, what are kids interested in today? What's the age of your kids, and what are they interested in today compared to how you saw your interests at those ages?
That's a good question. My children are very, very different from us. So I have a daughter who's 17 and a son who's 12. The daughter who's 17, she does great at school. She's real smart, but she doesn't have any real academic interests. She says that she wants to become an attorney, possibly, but that could change. She doesn't really read. She, on her free time, she doesn't really pursue. She doesn't have any hobbies at all. If left to her own devices, she likes to just sort of keep her space very clean and go on social media. And she communicates with her friends a lot, and they take lots of selfies. And she's often thinking about her beauty regimens. And so, I think that there is a space for her, especially in the CPG industry, because she does have interests in how to keep her skin and hair and nails and everything in the best condition, and sort of learned everything just from watching, little videos here and there. But now she instructs my wife on what she should be doing and how she should be doing it. And so she's like my wife's personal beauty expert.
Oh, interesting.
And so she really does know a lot. She's just suddenly absorbed it all from TikTok videos. And
That's the platform of choice for her?
It's the platform of choice for her. So we'll see what happens there. My son is, he's a little bit like me in terms of he goes real deep with things but then just sort of shrugs them off. And do you remember there was a book, something like Everything I Ever Knew I Learned in Kindergarten or something? Okay, it was a kind of a popular book at one point, probably 20 years ago. And I often joke that the name of his book would be Everything I Know I Learned from YouTube,
I think it's very
because
common today.
right,
Hmm.
and he really does know things, or as we often say, also, I watch YouTube and I know things
Hmm.
about him. But he's got this kind of a mind that really can detect patterns and can hold on to information. And so, almost, I would say, on a level of like a savant,
Mm.
he knows every flag in the world.
Wow.
And we've got this game now, an online game where he can go through and test himself and get 100% on every single flag of the world. And he can tell you off the top of his head the differences between flags and what unites certain flags, and how he can detect different countries that used to be part of the USSR by the designs of the flags, and what countries are related by the design of the flags, that kind of a thing. And he went through that for maybe 2 months, and then it was done with flags, and he was on to the next thing, and the next thing was dinosaurs, and now he can tell you the weights and heights and of all these dinosaurs, and when they lived and which ones overlapped and didn't, and which were stronger and how they fought.
That's amazing. Almost like photographic memory.
Almost like a photographic memory. And then just now, he just went on a tour of the Southwest with his grandparents, and they took him to all these sites. And we caught up with him in Moab just a couple of days ago, and we went to a dinosaur museum, and it seemed like he was like
Oh,
done with dinosaurs.
wow.
He didn't even really want to. He was just kind of glancing at him like, oh, well, that one's not to scale. The head's not to scale. The head would have been. And
That's a
so, yeah,
fake.
yeah, exactly.
Forgery.
And so, a little bit like, I would say there's this Nietzschean concept where he says, you should have brief habits in your life, and
Mm.
specifically areas where you go deep, and
Hmm.
then you just sort of go on to the next thing. And I would say that he really embodies that.
Hmm.
And, he desires to be a famous chef one day, but he never cooks.
Hmm.
But when he does cook, he actually knows what he's doing. And it's sort of shocking and surprising him
Wow.
every time. I don't understand. My daughter as well, actually.
Hmm.
My daughter is this incredible pastry chef. Where did she learn that? TikTok? I don't really know, but
Hmm.
she seems to have this sort of intuitive knowledge of making pastry, which is not easy.
Hmm.
And he's sort of similar with cooking himself. So it's kind of fascinating. I have absolutely no idea where he's going to end up going,
Hmm.
but I think
Well, with a skill like that, that's pretty unique. I think
yeah.
he'd be successful at whatever he applied himself to, and I see you in a similar way, the ability to hold a lot of knowledge.
Oh,
And a
interesting.
bit of a renaissance man. You've had many different careers and gone for mastery in each area.
Oh, thank you.
Hmm.
I've certainly tried.
Hmm.
I think it's just having when you go into a field, because it grabs you, and you suddenly find that you've got a passion
Hmm.
there.
That's important. Follow
That
that.
that's everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, you follow that,
Hmm.
and you just sort of you go through it, and maybe a little bit like him, you go through it and you see where it dumps you out at the
Hmm.
other end, and then it's always kind of a new starting point from there. And so
Hmm.
now you have this knowledge in your back pocket, and what do you do next, and how will that inform what you do next?
Hmm. So from music, then you went to Berkeley and started studying Egyptian time. And what grabbed you about Egypt?
Yeah, good question. So I was living in LA. I was heavily involved in the music industry through my girlfriend's band, through projects of my own, through really being a connector in that industry. I had been a big part of the punk rock scene in Orange County. Before that, I grew up with the guys from TSOL and Black Flag, who were just a few miles away, were often playing in Huntington Beach.
Now, a good friend of mine listens to a lot of Black Flag, or at least when we were in college, he was listening to a lot of it. And what kind of music was that? Was that like anti-establishment?
Anti-conformity, really looking at authority through the police, and how that they're just sort of an arm of the state. Punk rock music was really political. People often, it seems today that when people talk about punk rock or modern punk rock or the punk rock of the last 20, 30 years, they're talking about a kind of an aggressive music style, but it doesn't necessarily have the politics that original punk rock had. There was, when I was growing up, and my experience was that there was a real strong conformity bent, to society in general. That if you didn't conform, you didn't belong. And so, youth culture kind of had no place. And this is the story of youth culture for at least all the way back into the 40s and 50s. We see, youths kind of being ostracized for how they look, how they act, rebel without a cause kind of an approach. And then in the late 60s and early 70s, youth culture kind of dominates, and they change the way people think about music and culture. And in the 1980s, we kind of had, at least localized in California, really much more of a police state, it felt like to us. We were youths, and so I don't know if you could take our perspective to the bank, but there were because of the police in say Orange County, lots of riots that were started because the police would just show up at events. And I remember one very particular event, which was a surfing event. And my cousin was a surfer, and he was out there surfing, and I don't know, people were being, raucous, rowdy. And instead of just sort of, having somebody tell people to calm down, riot police showed up.
Wow.
And then all hell broke loose.
Wow.
Because people were like, oh, really? You want to just come here and tell us how we're supposed to be acting right now?
Yeah,
We're just at a
with the
surfing
threat of
event
violence.
with the threat of violence. And so apparently we weren't alone, because a lot of punk music at that time was really addressing that. Maybe not in a way that everyone could get behind. There were bands like MDC, Millions of Dead Cops, that were
That's a tough name.
That's a tough name. But then there were bands like, Shattered Faith that were, real close to us, I think in Westminster, in California, that were addressing things like the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan and sort of why those things were occurring. And so that was kind of the culture that I grew up in. And then we shifted into, me and my girlfriend and other friends of ours shifted into this other scene of really trying to understand the roots of this kind of anti-establishment slash, mildly aggressiveness in music by researching the garage bands of the 1960s and what some people called the roots of punk rock. And they didn't always have this political message. In fact, it was often not. It was more about relationships and those types of things. But they were making this music that would grow into some of the punk rock music later. And so we loved the idea that there was this kind of, esoteric knowledge about these bands and the individuals. And my role in some ways was kind of so just following this esoteric knowledge was something that we were very interested in, and I was really a big part of that scene, that music scene. And that began to grow a little bit as my girlfriend's band grew bigger and bigger, and then suddenly we were hanging out with the Ramones or going to a party with Deborah Harry, or meeting famous managers from the 1960s. And
What was
sort of.
that like behind the scenes? Like who are these people? What's really happening behind the curtain and with famous bands?
I didn't get to know them as well as my girlfriend did eventually, but I I was really I was just really enlivened by meeting these people and finding out just sort of bits of knowledge that weren't every day. What were you thinking when you wrote this?
Mm.
What were you, how did you play that? Or, what was the idea behind this song? Or, take me back to the recording studio and finding out, well, it was in my friend's living room and the dog kept
Mm-hmm.
barking and,
Mm-hmm.
and just having those little bits of knowledge, I think just really fed me
It was almost like a treasure hunt.
like a treasure hunt. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't a big fan of Johnny Ramone, that's for sure. He had the biggest ego, I think, of anyone that I had met in the music scene back then.
Mm.
But I just recently caught up with my ex girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
who today is still a musician and plays with lots of people.
Wow.
And she said that she became great friends with Joey Ramone, and she told me lots of stories about times that he was just the biggest sweetheart ever,
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
so
Good.
I loved hearing those stories
Mm-hmm.
actually, and then there were some others. Lux Interior, the singer of the Cramps. The Cramps was one of my favorite bands of all time, and a friend of ours from our scene, Candy, became their bassist, and so Candy got to invite us backstage with them,
Hmm.
and it was just so much fun. And
Mm-hmm.
meeting Lux, it was just like this, he was this huge figure for us, and it was fascinating to see these people and to see how they prepared for their shows, and
Was there a common thread amongst them? Like, who do you have to be to rise to that level?
there's an easy answer. You have to be authentic. You have to be absolutely authentic.
Mm.
You have to live and breathe the lifestyle. It's got to be part of you.
Mm.
There were lots of bands that came and went that sort of came in and aped the style, and some of them maybe had a small time hit in Los Angeles and then just went away.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were the people that were just, their music was so much a part of them, you couldn't separate the two. And those were the people that we really loved.
Mm.
And some of those people, when they passed away over the last 10, 15 years, it really hit me hard.
Mm.
Just remembering who those people were and what they were like back then.
This podcast is brought to you by BeMicro, organic freeze-dried microgreens for easy, everyday nutrition. Sprinkle them on any meal and enjoy the benefits. Shop now at BeMicro.farm and use PLANT15 to save 15% off your next order.
So there I was having this amazing life in Los Angeles. I had split up with my girlfriend who was in the music scene. I tried to get away from the music scene a little bit just to sort of see what else was out there, and had another girlfriend and sort of brought me a little bit more down to earth. Not as much into the club scene, going out and dressing up, and more really kind of more of a California hippie lifestyle of
Mm.
skateboarding with my shirt off and puka shells and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when we
It
broke
seems a
up,
little healthier.
it was a lot healthier, and it actually relates me a little bit to you and your house and your environment. When we broke up, I was so heartbroken that I left Los Angeles altogether, and I moved up to the Central Coast to be close to, well, actually, not to be close to. I moved up to the Central Coast and found a friend who knew somebody else who was looking for a roommate in a small town called Cambria. And I didn't know anything about that place or this guy or anything about the area. Got a room in his house, got a job at a local store, started living there, and was right on the ocean. And we would go up to Big Sur about once or twice a week and met people up there, and it was a completely different lifestyle. This was a lifestyle where we would meet people who would tell us about a party that was happening, and we would drive up there at night, and sometimes you'd have like a sketchy details, like park at this spot and walk like 2 miles back in, and then there'd be a big clearing in the redwoods or a big clearing in the trees where people had set out blankets and candles and hanging around with an acoustic guitar, drinking wine out of the bottle, kind of a thing. And I absolutely fell in love with that lifestyle and lived that lifestyle for quite a few years, but realized that uh, I was going nowhere, and I really I was hungry for more new things to understand, more different categories of knowledge. I was a big reader always. I was always writing. At that point in my life, I wanted to be a writer, and so I went back to college and started taking classes. And sort of what happened in the music scene, I wasn't just taking courses. I became really good friends with the professors teaching the classes, and we would hang out and go drink beer together and spend time at their houses. And I was starting to learn a little bit about history that I didn't quite know, and set me down this path of doing a lot of research, and research about history, research about the Civil War, research about world history, and kind of opened my eyes to a lot of different ways of understanding the world. And ended up moving from there to go to another junior college up in Santa Cruz, and wrote an essay. There was a poem by Ishmael Reed called I Am a Cowboy in the Boat of Ra, Ra being the Egyptian god Ra. And I wrote a response to it, and my teacher wanted to publish the response in the textbook. Would be the next edition of the textbook. And I was so petrified about the idea that something that I wrote was about to be published that I started doing lots and lots of research about it. What was Ra? What was what was Ishmael Reed actually saying here? Did I get it right? And so I started reading all these books on Egyptology that I can get my hands on at the local library. And then I went down to the bookstore, and the bookstore actually had a really big section on Egyptology and Egyptian history. And I would just sit there in the aisle day in and day out reading these books, never buying them, and really just building up this knowledge base, and came to the understanding that I wasn't actually right in my perspective on him. And instead of rewriting the essay, I asked her not to publish it. But what struck me from reading all of these books and Ishmael Reed's poem was that it almost seemed as though, because it was an ancient area of study, that people almost had free license to just make up whatever they wanted to believe about it, and that there was no integrity there. There was nobody sort of holding people's feet to the fire in terms of how their perspective. And it was almost clear when I read a book, that their perspective was more legitimate than others. And so I had this curiosity about Egypt. And when I finally got to Berkeley, I actually went there to become a writer. And I started taking classes in Egyptology on the side, and then very quickly realized that that's where I wanted to focus all of my attention. And my original thinking was, how does it get so wrong at the end? Well, not necessarily at the end, but how does one idea become so fractured that there are all these multiplicities of perspectives on this one area? And how is it that some of them get it seemingly so wrong and some of them get it so right? What is it about the perspectives either of the authors or what they've read or the histories that they've followed that have led people down these different avenues? And wouldn't it be interesting to take one concept and find where it starts and study that one concept in such great detail and then read the works that were written about this concept through history to see where they start to deviate. This is really popular with, say, religion, right? Because you can trace Christianity back to the Babylonian texts and the Sumerian texts and ancient Egyptian concepts, etc. But I had never seen it done. One concept being like a technological concept, at least until I read James Burke, and who was this English author who used to have a TV show on PBS called Connections, and he would show how one thing led to all these different things. And so that was my idea. I was going to track down one thing that I could understand intensely and then sort of follow it, and follow it not only through its diffusion into other cultures surrounding that culture, but also, later writers, maybe even from the 15th century, as far back as that, how they perceived this one thing. And so I decided that I was obsessed with the idea of the hour, which comes from Egypt, and I would try to see if I could understand everything I could about the concept of the hour, how it began, all the beliefs around it through Egyptian history, and then, like I said, the historical cultural diffusion of that concept. And so that's what I ended up doing. And interestingly, I was maybe a year deep into this area of study when I was standing in Berkeley at a cash machine waiting to get some cash out. And there was a guy in front of me getting cash, and he takes his money out and turns around, and immediately I realize it's Ishmael Reed. And so, because he was teaching at Berkeley at the time, and so I got to basically accost him, like, this poem of yours, etc., and told him the whole story, and he couldn't wait to get away from me.
Well, share a little bit of your learnings about the hour. It sounds like there wasn't really tracking of time, or at least down to smaller intervals until the Egyptians decided to do that.
There may have been. We don't have cultural records, right, of how people would have done it. There are some signs that tracking of time may have been done even in the Upper Paleolith, but and it most assuredly was done in the Old Kingdom. So ancient Egypt is broken up into the Old, Middle, and late periods. Old, Middle, and New periods. So the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom.
What time periods were those?
So we're talking about 4000 BC, roughly for the Old Kingdom, and about 1400 BC for the Middle Kingdom.
Okay.
So it appears the concept of the hour starts making its appearance in, I want to say, and it's been 28 years, the 11th dynasty, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th dynasty of the Middle Kingdom. But it didn't come out of nowhere. It was knowledge that people had in the Old Kingdom. We just don't have any references for it. So it was probably written down by scribes. But in the Middle Kingdom, what we have is kind of an understanding already of time and how it's divided up. So the Egyptians had a 30-day month, a 12-month year. They divided their year up into seasons, and they essentially had a 12-hour of night, 12-hour a day, so 24-hour day concept. What we have right now is our understanding of time comes from what's called the Egyptian civil time. So it was for ceremonial purposes and also for political reasons of taxation, that they developed these systems. But in the Middle Kingdom, what is interesting is that the Egyptians know intuitively and through all of this research that they've been doing for thousands of years when the Nile is going to flood, which happens in late summer, and it's really important because they need to know when the Nile floods, because farmers need to divert all that water into their own crops and to try to save water. And so it's a very, very important date in almost everything that they were keeping track of, and time-wise is related to that flooding, because it doesn't rain in Egypt almost ever. And the times it has rained have been very pivotal and noteworthy. But it does rain in the Blue Nile areas like Ethiopia, and so that rain ends up flooding into Egypt at a certain point. And so their clock, or the calendrical system, is all set around that period where Sirius rises on the horizon. Then that tells them that it's about to flood and they can prepare.
Is that a star?
Yeah, it's a star.
Okay.
So
what were the tools that they were using to track this and I guess figure time out?
they had different tools. They had sight tools for watching the horizon. So essentially, what we learn from the Middle Kingdom and some coffin lids from a place called Asyut is quite interesting. That normally time reckoning is only for kings, and it helps them to understanding of time and transits of stars. It helps them to understand the rising and setting times of different stars throughout the entire year. It also gave them close knowledge of the circumpolar stars in the north and south, the stars that never set or never extinguished, as they would say. And those stars became places that the Pharaoh would travel to after death in order to have eternal life. So that was essentially a concept of heaven. But by the time we get to the first coffin lids that have survived, they're not pharaohs. They're just these sort of, a little bit wealthier individuals living in this area that are using it sort of for their own personal afterlife quests. And what they show are called decans or deacons, however you want to say the word. Deca from the Greek 10, and they would show 10 stars that would sort of come above the horizon right at sunset, and they would mark the rising of these stars in their belts of 10. There were 36 overall. One star would rise, and every day it would come up 4 minutes sooner, and you wouldn't be able to see it because the sun wasn't set yet, and so the next star would sort of take its place. So they roughly divided those. Each star would rise for 10-day periods, and because there were 36, they ended up making a 360-day year. They would build a low wall. There's something on the horizon with dust called Arcus Visionis, which was just sort of like a 1% to 2% layer of the horizon that was dust at all times, so it wouldn't give them very clear vision. So they would build a wall that would rise above the horizon, and they would call that the horizon line. And as the star would rise, they would mark it on the wall. And then and then throughout the night, about 12 of them roughly would rise, but they really watched the transit of 10 of those stars. And then they would have like a tube of some sort or reed where they would basically just focus on the star that was coming up. They would mark it on the wall, and then they would use a string with a weight on it to sort of mark down the wall how it would rise, and they would bisect the lines of the different stars as they would rise and set to help them understand directions as well, like north, south, east, west.
And did that then, as they advanced, did they simplify their techniques? I just think of like a sundial. That seems like, what was the next iteration, and then how did that spread, out of Egypt and to around the world.
They would mark these stars, and they created these graphs called diagonal star clocks. That's what we call them. And they would show the rising and settings of stars throughout the year, so all 36. And they would show the hour, which star would mark the hour, and which day, and which belt would be used, which decanal stars would be used for that month. And you could read this almost as a map of time for the year. So you could see the month, you could see the hours. They had different names for all the stars. There was something interesting that we still don't fully understand, and maybe now somebody has, but they used to say in the Asiut clocks that it would be this star would be near the eye or the knee or the mouth, and we don't know if they had a statue or if it was a person who was standing by the wall or if it was related to the dead. And so it's still a question, but so they had these decanal star clocks, and then at some point in the late Middle Egyptian period, they started using clepsydra, which is essentially a bowl that was wide at the top and narrow at the bottom and had a hole in it, and they would fill it with water. And they figured out the diameter of the hole leaking the water out would allow them to sort of time the hours with the rising of the stars. It takes roughly, as the stars are rising on the horizon, they would mark it, and then it would go up, and then the next star would come up roughly 40 minutes or an hour later, and that's what they would mark their hours by. So the bowl would flow out at the rate that it would take for the next star to displace it, and that's how they came up with this.
And there were lines in the bowl.
There were lines in the bowl that would mark the hours, and then they would have summer hours and winter hours. Then you could use that same bowl if you were in the right season for telling time during the day.
Oh, it's seasonal.
It was seasonal, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, is there any flaw in this? Because everything's moving on. Like, how are the stars always locked in like that?
Yeah, it's not always locked in like that
Yeah.
because of many different reasons, leap year being one of them. So,
Oh.
if I'm recalling correctly, and like I said, this has been a long time, the star that would mark the beginning of the month or the beginning of the night for that month would rise 4 minutes sooner the next night. So as the sun was going down, you would eventually end up not being able to see that star. And so it would be the next star would take its place, right? And the Egyptians knew about these, the sort of difference in time for lots of different reasons. For one, they didn't have a concept of leap year. So, the year isn't actually, exactly the same length that they thought it was, divisible by 10, 360, days in the year. And so they ended up having to make lots of corrections. And I think, as I think we've talked before, a lot of people just don't understand that you see something written in stone or, something ancient like that, and it looks like, there's no mistakes there. But yeah, there are spelling mistakes, there are logic mistakes, there are math mistakes, and especially where the stars were concerned, because they are supposed to help the pharaoh or the queen, pharaohess, sort of navigate the world of time to be able to gain their rightful place in the heavens.
Wow.
They were very important. So you would see, especially in the Ramesside period, the New Kingdom, lots of star clocks that have been kind of scratched out and rewritten because, they were, and some of the Ramses were alive for a longer period of time than some of the younger kings, and so they would start building these tombs for them when they're very young. And then they would complete them, and by the time they became old, the calculations that they were showing weren't accurate anymore. So they would try to write in the new star. Well, actually, this star, is going to rise over here. And then they also understood that Sopdu, or the star that Sirius that rises on the horizon to sort of signal that the flood was about to happen, also has its own cycle. I want to say it's about 1400 years. And over the course of Egyptian history, they started to understand that time was slipping, and there's this sort of 1400-year cycle for Sirius to sort of go back to the place it started.
1,400 years they're tracking.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's thousands and thousands of years of a culture.
Yeah. What was the technology that then spread to other cultures, other nations?
Clepsydra for sure.
That's
the Greeks.
the bowl.
Yeah, the bowl. Yeah, the water thief, it's called. Definitely was used by the Greeks, and the Greeks also had a seasonal hour. The Egyptians, there's different perspectives, but my perspective was always that the Egyptians really wanted to try to get to an even hour. And even though their clepsydra showed seasonal hours of different lengths, it seemed to me that from what I was studying, that they actually would have liked to have had an hour that was the same length. But they were observers ultimately. They weren't trying to control nature necessarily, so they would go with the flow, so to speak. The Greeks, when they adopted the clepsydra, it's much more understandable that they were okay with the seasonal hour, meaning that shorter hours in the summer and longer hours in the winter, and that was just the concept. Sometimes in the Greek period, you could have more hours in the night, so there could be 13 or 14 hours, but the Egyptians, in their stories and their cosmologies, they pretty much codified the idea that there were 12 hours of night and 12 hours of the day, and they weren't part of one day. Right? It wasn't like, we have the hours of day right now, and when the sun goes down tonight, that's a continuation of one day. They're kind of thought of as two different creatures. There's the day hours and the night hours, and they don't necessarily go together in one 24-hour chunk, even though that's the way we look at it looking back. And so you would have at night the transits of stars, that would go through 12 gates, they would say. At each gate, there was some sort of danger. Apophis, the god, was always trying to capsize the boat of Ra. It was believed that the sun was Ra, and there were different beliefs throughout history. The sun would rise, and then the sun would die, and the sun would go into the underworld. And when it was in the underworld during the night, it would have to go through 12 gates, and those represented the hours. And each hour there was some sort of tribulation that had to go through, and then it would rise again. But you asked about the diffusion. So the clepsydra obviously went into Greek culture. There were obelisks that were used for just sort of like marking the shadow of the sun.
Is that what the common name for a sundial?
That they didn't have sundials in the Egyptian. They would have an obelisk that would just kind of roughly mark, the passage of sun. So if the sun's directly overhead, it's not casting a shadow, and then if it's later in the day, it would cast a shadow over here, and so that was also adopted by the Greeks. But in the Egyptian period, it was really for civil purposes. There were religious hours and there were civil hours. So the civil hours were the hours of the year that would culminate into the flood, and at which point they could tax people for water. And so they had a system of taxation, and so that was more of the civil purpose. Then there were the priests who were really involved in rituals, who were looking at the decans or decans, the passage of stars, but they were also looking at lunar cycles and trying to sort of mesh those things together. And those were more for purposes of sacrifice, those types of things. And then in the New Kingdom, we've got some solar temples that sacrifice animals, for right at sunrise, and so they'd need to know when that was going to happen, etc.
After studying time so much, what is your perspective on time? Is there something that you believe that maybe about time? Because in some ways was it discovered? Was it made up? Was it, how do you look at time?
I think it's interesting. I think humans look for patterns and rhythms in the world, and the ancients found those rhythms and patterns in watching the rising and setting of celestial bodies, stars, the moon, the sun. The deacons, they could really form their culture around these kinds of hidden rhythms. So the average person didn't have a concept of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something that people wouldn't wake up at X time and do things. That comes much later. But I think it's very interesting how they were able to find these hidden patterns that already exist and to try to create a system around them. Um, I didn't necessarily walk away with an understanding of time that was much different than the average person, except for the knowledge of where it begins, and the importance and the difference in different types of time. Lunar time versus
Mm-hmm.
solar time versus star time versus clepsydra, or different devices that were created that eventually sort of take something that you could see in nature as just a movement and turn it into a concept that was very abstract, like duration, and how that concept of duration really is what we all necessarily live by, very extracted from in anything in nature, because our lives don't really depend on all of the same things that they did for the Egyptians. But I think for me personally, it's very fascinating that a lot of things that I've become involved with, for instance, fermentation, they're also hidden worlds that exist, and you're not necessarily trying to harness it as much as you're trying to witness it and build a system around it in a very similar way. The clepsydra for the ancient Egyptians, marked time through the flowing of water out of bowls. And in a lot of ways, my work later on with fermentation was also about water and time, and marking these times and trying to understand the hidden patterns that exist there. And I think that for me, personally, again, it becomes about these sort of hidden worlds that exist, and how to witness them, and how to maybe create some sort of system from it.
I wonder if there's any advantage to not tracking time. So those that were not involved in time, I shared with you how I'll do sweat lodge, and it's, they call it kind of Indian time. So okay, we're starting at noon, but noon might really be 2 or 3 o'clock, or it might be, and there's like a real looseness. There's like a real flow around it that, at least the indigenous that I've been learning from, the way that they treat time. They're not so like me. I live out of my calendar, and I think it creates a bit of an angst in me, where it's just like these 30-minute blocks, 1 hour blocks, and it's like, okay, next thing, and versus this just being more, allowing yourself to be just more in the flow, not hold on to the day or life so tightly.
I mean, I guess it depends, right? You can't build a society like that, I don't think.
I don't think so either.
And or maybe you can, and but it's not necessarily based around an event, right? So is it important to know when the year is starting over for planting reasons, for instance, or for winter, that you necessarily need to know when you're going to move your culture out of a region, or for grazing purposes, whatever it might be. And so I think that when you look at human history, you do see that cultures that develop around a concept of time, and I think it's all cultures, is very specific for reasons of survival.
Mm-hmm.
I think day in and day out, because we do live in sort of a structured society, it's easy to kind of drop out, for a day or two or a week or whatever the situation might be. And we don't necessarily have our culture right now so much based around seasonal, movements or anything like that. So it's not as important today, at least in this culture, in this place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we just go to the grocery store. We don't need to worry about our farm flooding.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's when I'm the happiest, when I'm just out in nature and I can let go of time and I can just be in the flow and I don't have to worry about, just the tightness of maybe my work days.
Your schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, we are our schedules these
Mm-hmm.
days, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the schedules kind of own us more than we own them. That's what happens.
What else from your studies about Egypt maybe surprised you? What's something else that you believe to be true about Egypt that maybe most wouldn't know?
I think it's interesting from my studies of ancient Egypt, and I only scratched the surface of it. But for instance, the time reckoning, I think the person or people, the priests, they would have been, and scribes, who first discovered that you could link this astronomical movement to a point of duration, that person or those people were absolute genius, right? I mean, it's such an abstraction when you really think about it. And so I think that was really fascinating for me. There are pyramids, there are tombs, there are lots of interesting architectural concepts that the Egyptians came up with, and they were fascinating, but to me, they weren't as fascinating as the people who robbed graves that were able to come in later and go through these multiple layers of rock that were would collapse in place, that the pharaoh would have the teams make so that the grave couldn't be robbed.
Yeah, just sealed in
Just
such a strong way.
yeah,
How could they get through it?
we're talking about 100 feet down with, and they would build two pieces of rock together that would have sand that would hold them up, and
Mm-hmm.
and they would let the sand out, and they would collapse down and
Wow.
create this
Mm-hmm.
solid floor. But
Just bomb shelters with bomb
yeah,
shelters.
bomb
And
shelters.
probably like hidden too. And how
Yeah.
do you even know to follow this path of rock walls?
Yeah, they would have all these, they would have people building it, and then a lot of times they would just off, everyone who was
Mm-hmm.
like involved with it, so that they wouldn't be able to find
Tough
it.
job.
Yeah, tough. It was a tough job for sure. But then these people would come in later with copper tools, and they would drill through that and get down in there.
Hmm.
And that was almost as mind bending as some of the structures that they built themselves. I always thought that was fascinating. The other thing is that for all of the grandiosity of the culture and the pyramids and everything that were built, and I mean, they are mind bending, they weren't really as advanced as people tend to think about Egyptian culture. If you look at their math system, their base 10 math system, etc., they were figuring shit out, but not by necessarily using hardcore math, or they didn't have an understanding of pi, and there was lots of beliefs about them rolling a barrel or something to try to use pi in their building, but nothing necessarily points to that. They were using very rudimentary understandings, but they were able to do a lot with it. Their medical texts, the medical papyri that come later on, and different writings that existed later on with Herodotus, they they had a very interesting understanding of the human body, and from looking at human bodies, also from the Fourth Dynasty, when the pyramid builders. There's lots of texts that sort of come later that talk about their understanding of trephining, or boring a hole in the skull. and doing surgeries like that because people were having shit dropped on their heads a
Okay.
lot, and so
And then
their
they
heads
were
were,
swelling up, inflaming, and
well, they were like breaking their skull, and so they would, cut around and pull out fragments of bone from the brain. The earliest mention of the brain is in ancient Egypt. And so that's interesting. Reading the medical papyri, they would couch cataracts by using a very, very sharp piece of copper that they would poke into the side of the eye and push the cataract down so that you could see over the top of the cataract.
whoa.
They had very crude methods for preventing pregnancies by using fly and alligator dung. There's lots of interesting concepts that they come up with for overcoming dental issues. For instance, there was lots of dental surgery, the way that they would fix bones in the body. So we have all these different sorts of approaches that they took to the human body and medicine that are, I think, I think that those discoveries and those challenges that they overcame are worth 100,000 sphinxes. They're much more interesting than a funny shaped building.
Now, speaking of the Sphinx, I had in research for this, there's somebody that dated the Sphinx far older than I think maybe traditional archaeologists are giving credit to. And they're saying because of water erosion, they were able to date it in this kind of a way. And they believe that in a couple, one being Graham Hancock. Have you heard of him?
I haven't, no.
Well, he has a theory that there was an advanced ancient civilization before the Egyptians, and they died off from some catastrophic event, a meteor maybe, and that the Egyptians that we're speaking to are more of part of like the recovery.
So I've read. We used to have in Egyptology classes these kinds of pieces of claims, I guess, that would be brought in every week.
Because I love just, I guess, like romanticizing about all of these other possibilities of what was going on in Egypt. And
Yeah.
you're saying how you're like, they didn't really have that much figured out. They didn't, their math wasn't even there. They were just throwing people at it, and they didn't really seem to care if people died while they were figuring stuff out.
Yeah, well, they really didn't, but
Yeah.
they did figure a lot out. But you see that they're constantly trying to overcome challenges and the challenges that they are creating. So there was a famous sort of historian, I'll call him, that came up with a lot of these concepts. Named Schwaller de Lubitz, that had a lot of, I believe, was the first to come up with the Sphinx being older than it is.
Oh, okay.
And that's not necessarily a world that I delved into too much, but I think if you just read what some of the top Egyptologists in the world have had to say about these things, they will say, well, yeah, I mean, the rocks came from this area where it did see a lot of erosion over, millions of years, and then they were cut, and then they were carted over here, and you can see that the rocks were turned, upside down, and they can sort of reconstruct where the rock came from and sort of look at the wear patterns based on that. But as far as cultures that existed before Egypt, there is a long history. They had lots of native cultures there in Egypt that are known and studied and understood. It's not as much of a mystery as it might seem.
But not like some advanced civilization that was doing things that maybe we would consider almost magical today.
Not by any means. I mean, there were the
Shoot.
Tirsian, Badarian, Amoratian, Girzian, Sumanian. Those were all different tribes that lived in Egypt in different parts, mostly, in the area around where the pyramids would be found today. And it was those cultures and those, quasi-tribal cultures that had a lot of the religious beliefs that led into the buildings of different tombs and the reasons why they would build tombs. For instance, faced they would face their dead to the river because the river was this idea of life and eternal life, and they were all buried on the west coast of the Nile, and and because they were buried in pit graves, and they didn't have belongings, a lot of them, nothing would touch the body, so all the fluids would leach out of the body, and the body would be preserved. And so later cultures found these bodies, and it seemed like they were sort of eternal, that they weren't going to waste away. And so you could almost look at all of Egyptian history where the funerary concepts are involved as an effort to try to preserve the body, as well as those early pit graves would, because the moment you had riches, you would be buried with your bowls and other things, and they would touch the body, and the body would decompose in that area. And so then how do you preserve a body if you become wealthy and you want to take it with you, kind of a concept. And so therein lies the whole history of mummification and removing different body parts. And, I'm simplifying it obviously, but it all does come from those early cultures that are very, very, understood as well as they can be, but they did exist there, like I said, for thousands of years. And so, they're all very, very simple cultures, and everything that we understand from them is through extrapolation. But when you look at the remains of, Tirzan, Badarian, all these cultures, we're not finding advanced civilizations there. And that's precisely the period in which, some of these later, pseudo archaeologists or Egyptologists would make claims that these things existed, but only because they don't have a clear understanding, it seems, of what actually does exist of material culture.
So in preparation for this, I shared with you a video that I think Italian scientist used some technology, I think called SAR scanning, and was looking at the Great Pyramids, I also believe, and was able to see that there's these pillar-like structures that go well below the pyramids. And his belief is, and he's trying to raise funds and maybe excavate and to go really look at these, that the pyramids were something of a power center, and that these pillars that went underneath, because of seismic, I don't know, waves, just like the earth moving, would generate some kind of a power that would then be used to, I don't know what, to power what. Any thoughts on that?
Not really. You and I talked a little bit about it briefly, and I think, I sent to you, I went and researched at the, online just for a minute, and I found that the director of the Cairo Museum, who is very, very well-renowned Egyptologist, said very plainly, well, in order to do those studies, you would have to have gotten a permit, and they never got a permit. And
I think they could do it from satellites.
And we watch that area, and we understand, what happens in these areas, and the type of device or the sonar or lidar that they were using. He says, can penetrate X far into the earth, but not any further, especially from the distance that they were talking about. So they wouldn't have been able to actually see that far. But, he said, great, show it to us, show us the evidence. We'd love to see it, and we'd love to support you, because when you really think about it, what does Egypt have if not in terms of its exports? It's got very few exports. It's got cotton, it's got sugar cane, it's got a few things, it's perfumes. It really is a culture that's based around tourism. And I think that the Egyptian government would love nothing more than to have something that was so extraordinary that they could draw millions and millions of people to visit every year. They really need that. So there's no reason for them to not necessarily want to have that be true.
Yeah, why
It's
cover it up?
what, yeah, there's no reason for them to want to cover it up. I think it only fits the narrative of the people coming up with these concepts, that they come up with a concept that seems totally like illogical. They come up with a process that, other people say doesn't seem to fit the
Hmm.
reality as far as they know. They're not presenting any of the evidence to back it up. Yeah, they're just making sort of like the broad stroke claims. And then, so the Egyptian government is saying, great, let's work together on this. Like,
Mm-hmm.
bring it on. And so they're not apparently, at least reading his posts, they've not presented a single shred of evidence about any of it. And so who stands to gain from that kind
Mm-hmm.
of relationship, right? The people making up these stories obviously have a lot to gain.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the authorities come forward and say that's untrue, then they could just say, oh, you don't want it to be true because
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to preserve some side of like misunderstanding. And that's kind of the mechanism that has always occurred with these types of things. I mean, you could look back to the 1930s and look at the fascination with Egypt and mummies. And that was a time when in Western European culture, people believed that eating pieces of mummies would like give you like stamina, sexual stamina and arousal. And there were like people going into Egypt and like busting apart mummies and
That's a
putting
crazy
putting them
one.
in capsules and things and
Wow.
selling them in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And there were obviously doctors saying like, no, don't do that. And they would
Mm-hmm.
say, well, you're just trying to like prevent us from having this, secret knowledge of this wisdom that maybe Western medicine doesn't understand. And so there's always been that push and pull. And I think it's fun, to go down those rabbit holes. But I think it's even more interesting to actually look at the reality of, or what we actually do know, or actually what has been studied, and what can we sort of extract or extrapolate from that about the way people understood their own culture.
Well, you shared a line with me when we were last met, and it was something like the the possibility. Or how did you say it?
I think it was that the
Like
uh,
what's possible is
yeah,
more
the possibility of what can be,
what might be.
what might be
Yeah.
is always more evocative than what is.
Because there's certainly a lot of talk, just looking on these SAR scans, it's like millions of views. Like people are really like, whoa,
Yeah.
what is going on here? And I wonder, just maybe the last question on Egypt, our culture is so interested in the history of Egypt. I mean, talk about mummies. We still have got mummies in our videos in Hollywood. It's like, why are we so interested in this culture?
It's really evocative, and the average person doesn't know a thing about this culture. And so, they're willing to believe anything that comes along. And there's some sort of interest in believing that there was some sort of almost divine intervention at some point,
Hmm.
a more advanced culture,
I love believing
etc.
that.
Yeah, like
Um,
that it grows out of nowhere. It's just suddenly on the scene. But I think it takes not knowing anything to believe that it just suddenly pops up on the scene. And what's interesting is that people who don't have clear understanding, or just have a pop culture understanding, or read some blogs or some things, they come to this like position that they're like ready to die on that hill.
hmm.
They're so fervent about their approach, or about what they believe is knowledge, and that it's sort of they're going to bring this truth forward, or they're the carrier of truth somehow.
Hmm.
And it would seem when you actually study an area, any area, that the people who have the clear understanding and the real knowledge in those areas are usually the ones who are more open to like not really knowing everything and still learning and still
Hmm.
trying to evolve, and not really trying to hold on fervently to this truth or that truth. Because I think when people come up with these fantasies, almost that it fits something about their belief system, and it fits something about sort of, almost a system of ignorance, that you kind of like pack these stories around almost an ignorance of an area, and it can almost seem like you're the purveyor of truth here. And I think we see it in today too, with beliefs that people have about lots of different areas, or misbeliefs maybe. I mean, and it's fascinating because I was dating a woman who had some very interesting beliefs about ancient Egypt, and we were together while she was writing a book about Egypt. And we used to we used to have these conversations slash arguments that eventually split us apart. And then she went off, and she actually did do a lot of research and a lot of soul searching, and she changed her perspectives. She kept some of the romanticized perspectives for the book, and she published a book called Written in the Ashes, and all about the Library of Alexandria.
This podcast is brought to you by BeMicro, organic freeze-dried microgreens for easy, everyday nutrition. Sprinkle them on any meal and enjoy the benefits. Shop now at BeMicro.farm and use PLANT15 to save 15% off your next order.